however you're navigating this season of life, don't add any extra expectations or beliefs or stuff to your plate right now. I think maybe the biggest act of self-care you could give yourself is to just simplify and trust what you are currently doing to care for yourself is enough. If your self-care isn't enjoyable, then that's not self-care.
Hey, my friends, this is Nishant, and welcome to the Nishant Garg Show. This is a podcast about helping you live a fulfilled life. And the mission of the show is to spread mindfulness awareness, and my job on this show is to invite world-class experts to extract the practices, routines, and habits to help you live a fulfilled and abundant life. Today's guest is Randi Kay. Randi is a holistic health practitioner and educator that has been helping people heal through bodywork, yoga, and self-care coaching for over a decade. Her mission is to help people simplify the healing journey by amplifying their own inner wisdom and teaching seasonal self-care practices. Along with her practice based out of Fargo, North Dakota, Randi offers self-care tools online such as her seasonal healing membership, instructional online courses, and coaching, and the Simple Self-Care podcast at naturalrandikay.com. She plans on retiring in a treehouse. In this episode, she talks about living on the mountains, seasonal healing, self-care practices, trusting your inner wisdom and your own natural rhythms, and much, much more. Without further ado, here is Randi. Randi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So I was wondering if we could start with, how would your family describe what you do for a living?
How would my family describe it?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think they would describe it as I just try to make the world a better place. They always are encouraging me in that way. And my parents are grateful I've chosen a career where I can help people. So I think they would just say that I help people.
We'll come back to your career in a while. You lived in the mountains for almost a decade. You were even a lifty at a ski resort. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So I grew up here in Fargo, North Dakota, and where I live now. And of course, as a teenager, I was kind of angsty about my hometown, and my mom's from Utah. So I grew up always going out there and just loving the mountains. And so when I was 18, as soon as I could leave the house, I packed up my car and just bummed around for a while. And I just love Utah. So I've lived all over Utah, but I just wanted to be in the mountains. And so any jobs I could get to be in the mountains was good enough. And so I had a friend that worked as a lift operator at a ski resort there. And so I just signed on for that. And we had a blast. Like, it was really chill, just hanging out in the lifts. And then we got an hour break to ski or snowboard or do whatever we wanted. And then in the springtime, when it was nice, we could go climbing at the bottom of the canyon. So there were days when I'd go snowboarding and rock climbing in the same day. So I can't believe I actually did that back in the day. But yeah, I've always been really into nature and connecting with it. And it's always been very therapeutic for me. So anytime I could, get a job or be associated with nature, I did.
What did you learn from living in the mountains?
I learned that you can have fun outside in all of the seasons. Well, there's a lot I learned, but I think that's the one that stays with me the most, because in Fargo, we just hated winter. In the summertime, we just, we spent time outside, but there's mosquitoes and stuff. And in Utah, like, every season was just, there was a new sport to do or a new thing you could do in the mountains. And so it was possible to just enjoy life year round, which was very cool. And I think the other thing that it taught me was it helped me gain confidence in myself and my abilities, because when you're rock climbing or you're skiing, like you're kind of putting your life in danger, and you can get caught in some sketchy situations. But when you practice safe practices and you work through those challenges, it's really empowering. And so I became really empowered in my body and my ability to do hard things from just the lifestyle of being in the mountains.
Why did you choose to stop doing that?
Well, I didn't really. I moved back to North Dakota about 7 years ago, which was, I was going to just stay here for a short period of time. I love Utah, which is why I stayed for so long, but I wanted a change of scene, but I didn't really know where yet. So I just moved back to Fargo because Fargo was changing a lot and seemed less lame than it was when I was growing up. So I just moved back here just to hang with my family and whatever. And then Fargo, I've come because of all I learned out in Utah, I was able to enjoy life in Fargo more and really appreciated the simpleness of being in the prairie and hanging out at the lakes because we're close to Minnesota. And so I came to enjoy different activities and different kinds of like challenges. And I opened a business here and grew my healing practice. And that was its own adventure and built its own kind of confidence. And so I still get outside and do fun things when I can. It's not as, glamorous as it is in the mountains or as easy, but I feel like I still live with those principles of challenging myself and working through hard things. It just looks like entrepreneurship and travel and enjoying the simpler things, not needing to be so extreme all the time.
We are definitely going to go deeper into the weeds about healing and self-care practices and regarding your career and business for sure. So as we are talking about seasons here, in your business, you talk about seasonal healing. What is that seasonal healing?
Well, it's basically a way to align yourself with the natural seasons and cycles of things. And because of all those experiences I shared, I've come to be very intentional about what each season has to offer. Because when I moved back to Fargo, I actually moved back in October a while ago, but I was like, why am I moving back here just in time for winter? But I also noticed that I moved around a lot and saw a lot of extremes because I wasn't very comfortable in my own skin. And there were things that I didn't want to address in the deep of winter that you can't really escape in North Dakota. And so I decided that if I could be happy in winter in Fargo, even if it's just for one season, I can be happy anywhere. And so I took that opportunity as like a personal challenge, its own kind of adventure, and really started tuning into the qualities of winter, why it's a wise time of year, how I can match that pace instead of just resist it and hate my life through that entire season. And it just started connecting the dots of what I was learning for my own healing and what I was teaching my clients and helping them with, and just more of a pace that supports our healing instead of going against it. I mean, we have created a culture where we don't have to really pay attention to nature very much. And that's really dangerous. And I think we're having a lot of health issues because of our disconnection from natural rhythms. And we're always trying to fight a cultural rhythm and like have more energy and do more stuff and achieve more things and da 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 da. And we don't embrace that there are seasons where we can be high energy and there's seasons where it's better to rest and restore. And so I've kind of, by talking about seasonal healing, it's a more formal way of just pointing out these patterns in nature and how we can really use them to our benefit, and that we'll be happier and healthier when we do instead of just ignore it and live in resistance.
What are the seasons to rest and recover?
So,
I'm very ignorant.
so winter's the most traditional one, right? So, but it can be applied to every season. It just looks a little bit differently. So, with winter, if you look outside, that's when and I'm following my seasons in the Midwest, upper Midwest of United States. And I know it's different in other parts of the world, but winter here is, things hibernate, it freezes over, and the living creatures are resting. The trees are resting, plant life is resting. And so it's a great time for us to also rest. I mean, if you want like the short and sweet version of seasonal healing, it's just looking out your window and observing and matching your pace to what's happening outside. And so winter's the traditional time to just not take on as much. You actually need more sleep because we have less sunlight. We have less fresh food to fuel us. And so we get to do things like meditating more, journaling more, working on ourselves, being a little bit more introverted, and use that time to truly rest and get clear on how you want the rest of your year to go, or how you want to move forward with your own body, whatever is going on with you. And then spring and summer are more active months or seasons. But even in summertime, it can get really hot and tiring. And so it's good to have more of like a free flowing pace. So it's summertime when we're recording this. And so it's like we get to be more active and out there and get some things done, but we need to balance that with some relaxation, like just chilling on the beach kind of energy. And so I think rest is appropriate in every season. There's just some where it's going to be more dominant than others. But deep winter, late fall is going to be more of the resting period, and spring and summer is kind of the more active and energetic seasons.
What self-care practices would you recommend during winter season?
Well, I mentioned a couple of them, but there's meditating more of these slower kinds of introspective activities that allow you to calm down your nervous system, calm down your thoughts. Journaling is really powerful. As far as, for our diets, it's good to have more warming herbs and stews and soups and spices so we can keep the digestive fire going. This is when you can be a little bit more structured with your exercise. And so it's nice to have kind of set times where you can, do a weightlifting program or something like that, because in the summer months we want your movement to be more fluid. But it's important to break a sweat every day in the winter, or else you can rest too much. You can get too isolated and too frozen. So you have to be incorporating these warming herbs and other practices that kind of keep you going intentionally. So it's kind of a balancing act.
Yes.
But that is some things for winter. It depends on what's going on with you too, because one thing that I teach within my seasonal healing membership program and with one-on-one coaching is how to kind of marry what your self-care needs are with the season. Because you could be in a season of life where you have to be a little bit more active or you have a lot going on, but it's in the middle of winter. So how can you kind of, if you picture a Venn diagram, like the two circles coming together, like what are the practices that fit in the middle? So you still get to honor your own body and your own situation and get to know yourself first. And then the second step is aligning that with the natural seasons. And then eventually those become more united over time. But any kind of self-care or healing program or anything that you take on, it's really important to always bring it back to yourself and your needs and not put pressure on it to look a certain way. So if it's in the middle of winter and you're like, oh crap, I should be resting, but I'm going through a move and a job change and a new baby and all this stuff, it's just like, and then you start feeling guilty that you're not honoring winter, or whatever we do with our brains. It's kind of like, okay, slow down. Like we get to, or how can I be busier with the pace of winter instead of the pace of summertime? So it's a continual like going back and forth. And it's really simple, but we're human beings with complicated lives, so it can get complicated. But you have to build a foundation of trust within yourself and honoring your own journey, and then applying that to other things. I think where we get in trouble with self-care is that we're constantly comparing it to something else or what we should be doing or what we think self-care looks like. And so seasons are the framework for me that I teach because it's good to have some structure to it. But at the end of the day, like it's all to be able to trust your own inner wisdom and your own natural rhythms.
If I understand correctly, are you saying that living in alignment with the seasons and still being in attune with your body, with your soul, what is working for you? So there is this balance that where we have to find that balance, how to be in alignment with everything from season to season, from our body, soul, for everything.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to not get too caught up in a particular routine or how you think it should look, because you have to course correct because life is changing all the time. And I think we're learning that very clearly right now in our season of life we're in. So there's so many things out of our control that we have to adjust to, as well as things that are in our control that get out of balance. And so staying open and just really doing what you can to build that intuition within and that trust within your own body, because our culture has been training us to not trust ourselves and to always need external approval. And there's so much information out there, and we're connected to so many people's lives that we can't really, it's almost becomes impossible to hear our own voice. And when we do hear it, we don't trust it. And so that's really the foundation of what I try to help people to do, and what has been true for my own life is that we get to build that trust with ourselves. And that's the purpose of doing self-care, is to be doing things that allow us to check in instead of check out, and to do these practices with compassion and trust and not with guilt or doubt.
Is there a practice to check in with ourselves? One could be meditation, second could be journaling. Is there any other practice would you recommend?
Yeah, it's kind of different for everybody. I always tell people to make a list of things that you really enjoy doing that take very little time or resources. And whatever of those activities you can plug into your life, the better. But for some people, it's painting. For some people, it is exercising. For some people, it's dancing, like around the house while you're doing something else. Like they don't have to be activities that you add to your to-do list. They can be things that you're doing throughout your day that you'll be doing anyway. But the point is that it's an intentional time to tune in. So I always teach a belly breath, like a mindful breath, to serve as your gateway. And you can do that breathing with almost any other activity. And so to start with, it's great if you have time to meditate and journal and, get a massage and, do all these other things. But sometimes that's not very doable, at least not yet. And so whatever you can fit in your day that you enjoy, that could be it for you. So for me, in the past, it's been on my commute to my studio, is like, I'm going to be doing that commute anyway. What am I listening to? Am I listening to the news? Am I talking to someone on the phone? So I just decided anytime I'm going to work is when I have a gratitude practice, and I just talk out loud to myself and I state what I'm grateful for. And that helps me tune in, and that helps me kind of approach my day with a different energy instead of the weight of the world from the news or all the things on my to-do list. And so it really just depends what is doable for you right now and what you enjoy doing. And it doesn't always have to look like meditation, journaling, all this stuff. That stuff is super powerful, and I teach it and I believe in it, but it isn't always accessible. Or some people hate journaling, like loathe it. And I am on a mission to shift that for people, and I have been able to, but I'm not going to make people do that, or tell people they should if it's not enjoyable. If your self-care isn't enjoyable, then that's not self-care.
So you have one blog on this, actually. If your self-care practice is stressing you out, it means it is not for you.
Yes. Yeah, so much. I've gotten so much feedback from people where I'm like, well, what are you currently doing for self-care? And they're just like, oh, well, I'm trying to exercise every day for an hour. And I'm like, do you like that? And they're like, well, no. And I'm just like, okay, well, I don't think that's self-care. Or they do something and they feel guilty about it, or they feel selfish, or they do all these things, and or even just the
Guilty.
idea of self-care stresses them out.
What are your current self-care practices in this season?
Me. Good question. It's been ever evolving this summer because I am pregnant for the first time. And so I'm venturing into a world of unknowns and things I have to think about that I've never had to think about, and things I have to adjust to. And so I've just been very gentle with myself, because not only I'm in midway through the second trimester right now, but when I found out I was pregnant, it was right when quarantine started, and I had to close down my business for a while. And so there was it was like nothing was normal at all. And so I had to stop and think, like, what do I actually need right now? One of those was allowing myself to rest, even though it's summertime. Like, my body was like, you're not going to be out there doing the pace you've been doing. One, because I couldn't, but two, like, I needed to take naps and I needed to do all this other like resting stuff to honor my body and my anxiety and the stress of the unknowns. So what I have been doing is making sure I'm going for walks. That really helps clear my head and just still connect with nature, but it's not very taxing on my body. I have been doing some yoga and letting that adjust with how my body adjusts. And then honestly, I think my biggest act of self-care has been preparing food. And that's never really been a big source of self-care.
That's not mine.
See, everyone's different. But for me, with my weird appetite now, I have to make sure that I have good quality food at my disposal, depending on what my body starts yelling for, and I have to eat more frequently. And so I'm just like, okay, I don't have time for my usual, journaling, blah, 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 other things I like to do. I'm going to dedicate my self-care time to cooking food that I know is going to nourish me. And so I listen to music while I do that. I'll connect with the food and the spices and things, and I turn that act into an act of self-care.
Preparing food is kind of a therapeutic session for you.
I don't love cooking, to be honest. So this is what I'm taking on. I love when I apply the deep breathing and the music and connecting. I enjoy it. When I'm just stressed out cooking and thinking I just have to do it, then I don't like it. So I'm using the essence of self-care to shift my relationship with cooking and turn it into a practice that is fulfilling.
Yes. So when you start your cooking, what kind of music do you listen to?
Oh gosh. Wow. Like this summer?
Anytime, when you enjoy, when you connect with yourself, when you connect with the music, when you connect with your food prep.
Yeah, I think, well, what helps is to start with a clean kitchen, which I also don't like cleaning. So I've had to turn that into a ritual as well.
We are the same. You and
Yeah.
I are the same.
But I've started to be like, okay, this is an act of self-care instead of a should on my to-do list, you know? So that helps me a lot bring aspects to it that I enjoy. And then well, right now there's the farmer's market. And so I just get a bunch of fresh produce and it's so pretty and it tastes so good that I just really tune into, and I make the vegetables the star. And I think like, what herbs do I have in my garden that would go really well with this? Like I like that creative aspect. So I make a lot of stir fries and I love pasta. Like I could just eat pasta all day, every day. And well, I'm a simple gal. I just like some angel hair with very good marinara sauce and some basil leaves.
What kind of
And
vegetable do you add in that? I'm just curious to know all these
well,
things.
so this is what I've been making it enjoyable for, is that I've been making my own pasta sauces instead of getting them from the jars at the store. And so I'll take some things from the farmer's market. This past week I did like eggplants, zucchinis, and peppers and carrots and stir fried them all together, put in some like just canned tomatoes, like not sauce, but just tomatoes you can get at the store, and then put in my herbs and some spices and then blended it all up. And so you can get all these vegetables in there and have it still feel like a simple red sauce. And so that's how I've been
I'm
stepping
visualizing.
up my pasta intake and justifying it. So I like to just get creative with vegetables and spices, and that is like a fun creative thing for me.
I actually love how you explain this principle of self-care practice. If it becomes a to-do list, we can get stressed out. If it becomes
Mm.
enjoyable, and this self-care practice is different for everybody. I enjoy meditation. I enjoy journaling. I enjoy going for walks, but cooking is not my thing. Swimming, maybe sometimes. So it varies from person to person. You touched a brief on meditation. Do you meditate every day or is it just occasionally for you?
I am not one to just sit and meditate. That's always been very difficult for me. And so, luckily, meditation can look a bunch of different ways, and there's a bunch of different styles. There's definitely been times in my life where I wanted the discipline of sitting and meditating, and there's amazing benefits to that. So, that kind of comes and goes. But for the most part, I implement meditation practices into the activities that I'm doing. So, like when I go for walks, I won't take my phone, and I love doing walking meditations or choosing a mantra and like marrying that mantra with my steps as I walk. I like to do guided meditations. So a lot of times when I'm falling asleep is when I meditate, and I'll connect. So for massage therapy, I do abdominal massage for people, and so I do and I teach people how to do that work on themselves. And so I do my little belly rubs at night with like a nice massage oil, and I connect with that place of my body and do some like a check-in with my core and my feminine power that's housed there. And now there's another human in there, which is super weird. But I always connect with that area and then do kind of a guided meditation with myself that I've just developed over time, where I go to a peaceful place in nature and explore around there. And so my meditating doesn't look like the traditional thing when you think of meditation, but I've just catered it to a way of doing it where I can do it every day, that in some way, shape, or form, and it's really fulfilling for me. So so many people are like, I'm so bad at meditating, or I don't like meditating, but I think because they're just trying to do that one way of meditation when there's just so many different
There are millions of
ways.
ways.
Yeah.
So when you go for a walking meditation and you repeat this mantra, and that becomes a transcendental meditation. You're saying the same word over and over. What is that mantra for you, if you don't mind sharing with us?
It changes depending on what I'm going through. If I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, it'll just be like, I am calm. And I'll just repeat that over and over in my head. I always kind of do an I am affirmation, or it could be a word of just like peace. Like, it's super simple. It's just whatever I need, whatever's a positive version of what I'm currently feeling. So if I'm feeling weak for some reason, and I've gone through moments of pregnancy where I just feel kind of weak and pointless, and so I've repeated I am strong. And so it's just whatever I'm needing to counter whatever negative self-talk is in my head.
What advice would you give to our female listeners who may be pregnant or who may want to get pregnant in the future? Do you have any advice for them?
For what aspect of self-care, or just in general?
Self-care and pregnancy.
Well, I would say that come back to me in a few months after I've given birth, because I'm still learning so much, and I'm in a phase where I'm asking other pregnant women for advice. But so there's that. But based on what I've learned so far, is that, and what I know, because I actually work with a lot of women who go through infertility, and I help heal childbirth trauma, like from giving birth. And so I do work a lot with women and know a lot of women's stories and how things have gone. And I think one of the things that I'm repeating to myself is that I trust my body, and I trust whatever is going to happen with it. So if a miscarriage happens, that is wisdom from my body, that it wasn't, something was wrong. If childbirth ends up being super insane, and it doesn't go how I expected, it usually never goes how women expect it, from what I've learned. And so I'm staying very open with trusting, doing my best to prepare my body, but then just releasing any expectation of it having to look a certain way, and not being afraid of my body, and not being afraid of what's happening to it. The other thing is I'm really practicing self-love with how pregnancy is influencing how I look. There's sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm just like, I am gorgeous. I am amazing. Look at what my body is doing. And I genuinely feel that. And I look at my belly and I just think it's the coolest thing. And then I have other moments where I catch myself in the mirror randomly and I'm just like, ugh, like, what's happening? And so I just keep reminding myself of how freaking cool it is that my body just knows what to do, and being really gentle with how my body is changing. And it's just a lot of surrendering. It's a lot of releasing and just trusting how things are going and how they're going to go in the future. And I'm really prepping myself for the postpartum experience because of my history with depression. I'm very nervous about that. And so getting a community of women and, meal prepping and asking for help in advance, so that when I give birth in November, we'll be heading into winter. And so I'm not going to get too isolated or too, stuck in those months, and that I have a community that I'm a part of to be in the journey with together. So those are my initial thoughts.
They are great thoughts. And you mentioned one great principle where you're kind of visualizing what can go wrong. It is accepting the worst case scenario. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many ways it can go, and it's good to prepare yourselves for those, but there's also just like trusting that it's going to happen however it's going to happen. And there's communities to support you if the worst case scenario happens. Your body is really resilient and can heal from whatever trauma happens. And it's also possible for it to just go as smoothly as it can go. And so it becomes a choice of what I'm holding in my body and holding in my reality.
It
And
is good to visualize and do some prep for the worst case scenario. If it happens, okay, what is the plan B?
yeah. Yeah. And then just trusting the people that are going to be there with you in the process. But I think that's true for anything you're undertaking, not just pregnancy.
Yes,
Like we're in a time where there are a lot of worst case scenarios happening.
every time.
and I think what I've been thinking about during this time is, one, I'm reminded of the loose ends that I have and have been putting off that are important for me not to neglect, because then I'll feel ill prepared for emergencies. But the other thing is like that this is when we get to use our practices. Like, this is why we do practices. So we have fuel and we have reserves to be able to handle stress and unknowns, because those are always going to be there. And so it's like, if you have your finances in order, if you have, your home in order, and if you have your health in order as much as you can, then you actually have something within you to be able to adjust to a crisis instead of just adding that stress on top of all the other stress. So
Yes.
this is just proving to me how important simplifying and intentional living and catering and nourishing yourself on a daily basis is, because this is how we build those reserves.
Self-care is not a project. It's not a one-time project. You get to do it every single day.
Exactly.
In this conversation, you have talked about trusting millions of times, and I love it. Does this trust come naturally to you, or you practice?
It's a practice for sure. I mean, because I've been practicing it for so long, most of the time I trust myself. But again, there's always new circumstances and there's always things that come in and mess with your head. And so it's learning what it feels like to trust. So there's some times when I'm like, am I trusting this? I don't know. Like, it kind of feels like fake it till you make it. But then I'm like, okay, I know how it feels in my body when I am tuning into my inner wisdom. I know what it feels like in my body when I fully trust something. And so am I feeling those sensations now, or am I not? So it becomes it's layers. Like, you just keep getting to deeper layers with yourself. But that self-doubt always is going to pop
Always,
in.
always.
Yeah. And so it's just it's trusting that you have trusted yourself before and it did turn out well, and you have the capacity to make good decisions and to make the right thing for you. And then if you don't, and it wasn't the best choice, that's really powerful learning. And so it can all be used to our benefit. But I think like the trusting thing is definitely an ongoing process, but it does get easier and you're able to sit through the gobbledygook in your mind a lot easier.
And having those positive affirmations, because that inner critique sometimes hold us to moving forward to getting what we want in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always have to bring in the positivity whenever we can, because the negativity is just everywhere. It's everywhere. It's seeped into our unconscious. And it's so anytime, it might sound stupid to look at yourself in the mirror and say positive affirmations, but like, why not? You got to do. And I've even communicated with people in my life that are maybe like more sarcastic, and I can joke around and be sarcastic, but I think if it's the majority of how people communicate, I actually have a hard time being around those people, because it's like, there's enough teasing and negativity out there. Like, we don't need to bring it into our friendship, And so I'll just have conversations with people and be like, cool it, I don't know.
So
Let's be positive.
we have talked about self-care, self-love. What's the difference between self-care and self-love?
Well, I think that self-care is a form of self-love. So self-love fuels the actions that you take. And so, but I mean, they're very, very similar, but that's another thing that a lot of people talk about. And I actually have a free guide of how to cultivate self-love that I can send you the link to if you want
Please.
for your listeners. But it's basically tuning into the love that is already there, because people are like, how do you love yourself? Like, what does that even look like? And it's already there, or else you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't brush your teeth. You wouldn't get up and do anything, like it's already there. It's just all these other things are kind of overpowering. So it's a very basic level of showing up for yourself, but then you can grow that love and acknowledge that more. And self-care is a tangible way of expressing self-love to yourself. And so it's these acts of prioritizing yourself, taking care of your future self. So when you do self-care, you're thinking about how you're going to be in the future and tending to that person. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
Can we have too much of self-love?
Well, I mean, I guess it's how you interpret it. I mean, you can definitely be, a narcissist and have it come out in destructive ways. I mean, but that's the thing, is like anything out of balance can be positive or can be negative. So there's been times when I have focused on self-care so much that I neglect some of the other things, or I just stay in my head all the time. And so, or there's a certain thing I like to do for self-care that gets too time consuming. And so with self-love, I mean, I don't know. I think if it turns into something negative, it's not self-love anymore. Like there's a different energy behind it and turning into something negative. I guess I've never thought about it before, but
this can be with anything. If any practice is turning negative, maybe we get to stop and think about it.
Yeah.
And for that, we get to listen to our intuition, as you have mentioned, that inner guidance, inner wisdom. How would you cultivate more of that inner intuition? How can we listen more to that intuition? It's there, but we don't listen to it.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get this reference, but like Peter Pan, old school Peter Pan, there's Tinkerbell, and they would make Tinkerbell's light would go out. And so they'd be like, clap if you believe in fairies, and like get all the kids to try to clap and acknowledge that she exists. And then with the clapping and the acknowledgement, then her light would get brighter and brighter and brighter. And I feel like that's the same with our inner wisdom, is that it's there, but if we keep ignoring it, then it's not going to be as loud and it's not going to be as prominent in our lives. But the more we follow our nudges and actually acknowledge it and act on what we hear and trust it, then it's going to get louder and louder and louder and be more a part of how we function, so that we don't really have to think about it that much. We're just always in relationship with that part of ourselves. And so again, that can look differently for everybody. And most of the time, it's not this big neon sign telling you what to do. It's just like a little something, a little nudge, or a little inner knowing that you just do something. So it's really important to look back on when you've trusted it before, when it's shown up for you before, how it felt in your body, what made you trust it. And so you can start to kind of understand the language of yourself.
And silence, practicing some sort of silence in terms of walking, running, to listen to that voice. Can I share my live example of this?
Please, yes.
So I bought this dream house last year in May. It's a brand new construction. I was so excited about it. And big house. I was excited. And from day one, I wasn't excited at all when I moved in. I was feeling like this is too big for me to clean. I don't want to do this maintenance. I don't want to mow my lawn. I don't want to do all these things. I don't enjoy all those things. I was sitting on it for months and months. Then I realized my heart wasn't here. I was feeling I have invested so much money, but my heart isn't here. I do not feel amazing living here. What can I do? I took this massive step 3 weeks ago that I am selling it off. And luckily, I got the buyer. So it's a big decision for me. I realized whatever this decision turns out to be, I will embrace that. I can't control everything, but and the as the days are coming closer, I'm feeling excited that I'm moving out of this house. I'm downsizing. So this is my little experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can feel it in your body and you can feel it in your thoughts. Like the information is always there. It's just trusting it. And like for you, it was probably like, what do you mean I don't like this? This is my dream house, So you're competing with your thoughts or your preconceived notions of what you need to make you happy. But you never would have learned that it's not for you if you wouldn't have had this journey also. So it's like all good learning, but you're kind of starting to tell the difference between what you need and what you don't.
And when life sucks so bad, there is huge learning in that. We don't see that learning, but it's an opportunity to see that learning. It's so tough. And now, honestly, I laugh when I get mad, when I get frustrated. I laugh internally. I laugh at myself. What the heck is going on? I start laughing. I practice laughing at it.
Well, we've become afraid of suffering and afraid of pain or afraid of making the wrong choice, when really that's where so much of the wisdom lies, in the discomfort, in the pain. So there's a whole module in my membership site about what pain really is and how we can communicate with that pain signal going on. But so many times we want to silence the pain signal because we're like, put a Band-Aid on this. This is just my body hating me. When really, if you lean into it and listen to it and try to nurture your pain, that's when you can learn where it's actually coming from and why it's here. And so all of the negative things in our lives have important information, even our negative thoughts. Where are they coming from? What are they doing here? Could they serve me in some way, or do I get to let them go? So we just have numbed ourselves to anything and without really seeing the gifts of it.
I am going to ask you my highlighted question that I have in my notes.
Okay.
How does mindfulness fit into self-care and self-love?
Well, mindfulness is bringing attention to something with that level of compassion and learning. And so I think if you're practicing self-care without mindfulness and self-love without mindfulness, you are missing a lot of what the point of it is.
You are just doing without
Yes.
mindfulness.
Yes. And sometimes we get to just go through the motions of things and we're phoning it in some days, which is fine. It's very hard to be present all the time. And a lot of it is just building the habit of something. But when we can, whenever it's accessible to us, and when we build that mindfulness muscle, that's when the magic happens. Like that's when we actually can gain the deep benefits of these practices.
Do you have any favorite mindfulness teacher who comes to your mind right now?
Well, I have studied mindfulness formally with Rashmi Bismarck through a yoga medicine training. And Tiffany Cruikshank also co-taught that training module. But Rashmi has written a book on a kid's book called Finding Om and talks about that in regards to children. But a lot of the principles of mindfulness I learned from her. And she has her teachings at Yoga Medicine and you can find her on Instagram and stuff just with her name. But I always kind of dabbled around mindfulness, and a lot of these self-care practices are very mindful practices without officially being like mindfulness in air quotes. And so I feel like once I dug deeper into what mindfulness is, it was very seamless to bring more intention and self-compassion to what I was currently doing. So yeah, Rashmi Bismarck, she's great.
Wonderful. Since we don't have a lot of time right now, but I wanted to ask you, what did you learn from your depression? You were going through depression as a teenager. So how did you heal from that, or what was that process look like? If you could explain that in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll give you the nutshell version.
Or we can go in length if you have time.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's similar to what we've been talking about. I mean, I was diagnosed with depression in high school, which I don't necessarily agree was a good thing, but it was what it was. And it's come back, I've had a back and forth relationship with it because it's just kind of a part of who I am and what I'm sensitive to. But I think what really helped me start to have a relationship with it, instead of just being like, I have depression, poor me, give me medication and I'll go to therapy and that's all I ever do. And those things are very powerful, and I'm not like anti those things. But again, it's more of a Band-Aid and not digging into what could be going on. And so when I started tuning into my depression, instead of ignoring it or being mad at myself for feeling it, I started to be like, hey, depression, why are you here? And why are you happening now? And then I started to notice patterns in when it would show up and what my triggers were. And so it was through self-care practices that I actually started tuning in to my depression. A lot of it was through journaling in the beginning, just so it would help me sift through all my thoughts that were going on. And so what I realized is that my depression would show up when other areas of my life were out of balance. And so now when I start feeling those feelings, I kind of have a checklist that I go through to be like, okay, well, is my house a mess? Yes, that's the first thing I'm going to do to treat these depression symptoms. If I do that and it's still there, then I think about my diet and exercise, because I know that's a huge indicator to me. Like when I'm on top of what I eat and I move regularly, it really, really helps. It's the most effective thing I've ever done. And then if that doesn't help, then I call my therapist and we dig a little deeper into what could go on. And then if that still doesn't help, that's when I start to consider going back on medication and finding the role that could play in my life right now. So I've just, I'm 35 and been dealing with depression since a teenager. So I've had a lot of time to cultivate this kind of relationship with it. But this is why I teach self-care, and why I keep teaching it, because again, this is where it's in these simple, humble practices is where a lot of the deep information is. And when we don't check in and really tune in and lean into our discomforts and what's going on and listen to ourselves, we're never going to know how to fully treat what's going on and where it's really coming from. There are a lot of other personal factors going on in my life that needed to change. I was married before, and that was triggering some stuff. I had a belief system, a religion I was part of before, and that triggered some stuff. So sometimes it led to really small changes like my diet and exercise, or sometimes it led to really big changes that were really challenging but worth it in the end. And so, yeah, nutshell version, I guess.
I love it. Nobody is perfect, and small changes with consistency can lead to big changes in life. And I'm sure we can definitely do another recording on this depression series.
Well, and I have a whole podcast on my podcast, Simple Self-Care, where I share more of my journey. There's even a mental health checklist that I created that people can download and use for
Yeah.
themselves to create their
Where
own.
can people find you online?
So naturally Randi Kay, it's Randi with an I, KAY.com is where you can find everything. You can get to my podcast from there. You can contact me from there. My podcast is on iTunes or wherever you listen, Simple Self-Care. And if you just scroll through, there's, I think it was last season, there was I think it's called Mental Health Revisited is the one where you can get the mental health guide. And so if you want more information, and you can always reach out to me. I email with people and listeners all the time. So yeah. And I'm on Instagram mostly. That's where I post the most and make most of my announcements is on Instagram at Naturally Randi Kay.
I will put all the information in the show notes. And last but not the least, I found this old post in your Instagram. Everything is a teacher. What are you learning?
Yes.
And Randi, any closing thought, any suggestion, anything you want to share with our listeners?
I think any closing thoughts was just that you're okay. And however you're navigating this season of life is however you're navigating. And don't add any extra expectations or beliefs or stuff to your plate right now. I think maybe the biggest act of self-care you could give yourself is to just simplify and trust what you are currently doing to care for yourself is enough. And if it's not enough, you're going to know. And
wonderful.
Yeah.
Putting my hand on my heart and saying, I am okay.
Yes. Yes. It's very powerful.
Well, thank you so much, Randi. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Self-caring with a lot of self-love and some mindfulness techniques. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can visit https://nishantgarg.me NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this episode with your loved ones to help them live a fulfilled life. You are not alone in this journey. We all struggle in life. There is no shame in talking about it. I go through my highs and lows. I get depressed, and these practices help me in living a resilient life. You can also do this. You got this. Don't judge yourself. You are doing the best you can. And thank you so much again.